You won't believe the chaos that erupted the very first day my wife and I tried to move into our new lake cabin. For months we had been dreaming of this moment, imagining peaceful mornings by the water, coffee steaming in our mugs while birds sang from the trees, and evenings sitting on the porch watching the sun fade behind the hills. It was supposed to be our escape from city noise, deadlines, and crowded neighborhoods. But instead of peace, we got the full force of a woman everyone in town secretly called Karen, and within 30 minutes of arriving, she had already called the sheriff on us. Let me take you back to that day, because once you hear how it unfolded, you'll understand why people still talk about it in whispers. We pulled up in a rented moving truck, the tires crunching over gravel, dust rising into the crisp air. My wife Emma was glowing with excitement, her hair tied back in a ponytail, sleeves rolled up like she couldn't wait to get her hands dirty unpacking. She jumped out before I even had the chance to put the truck in park and immediately grabbed a medium-sized box from the back. She balanced it in her arms, careful not to drop it since it was marked kitchen, and started toward the cabin door. I smiled at her enthusiasm, stretched my back, and was about to follow when I heard sharp, fast footsteps on the gravel path behind us. It was the kind of purposeful walk that already told you the person approaching wasn't coming to say, "Welcome to the neighborhood." I turned and saw her, a woman in her late 50s maybe, short blonde bob, oversized sunglasses even though the trees shaded most of the road, and a clipboard clutched in one hand like it was a weapon. She had that stiff posture and pursed lip expression that made it feel like she was permanently scolding the world. She didn't even say hello. Her first words, fired like bullets, were, "What do you think you're doing?" Emma froze halfway up the steps, blinking in surprise. Moving in," she answered slowly, as if the box in her arms didn't already make that clear. The woman planted herself on the path like a gatekeeper and glared at Emma, then at me. "This property isn't authorized for you," she snapped. "And those boxes? Completely against HOA policy. We don't allow unsupervised deliveries." I raised an eyebrow, trying to keep my cool. "Ma'am, we're not getting deliveries. This is our stuff. We just bought this cabin last month, closing paperwork's all finished. We're moving in today." But she didn't even look at me, just flipped through the papers on her clipboard like she was searching for a violation to throw at us. She muttered something about unapproved occupancy and grounds fines, her voice sharp and dripping with superiority. "Unbelievable," she muttered loud enough for us to hear. Then she straightened and practically shouted, "You're trespassing. And if you think you can just waltz in here with boxes of who knows what, you've got another thing coming. I run this neighborhood." Emma glanced at me, a flash of disbelief in her eyes, but kept walking up the steps with her box. She wasn't about to waste energy arguing with a stranger on a power trip. Still, I could feel my own patience slipping. "Look," I said firmly, "this isn't trespassing. This is our property. I don't know what's on your clipboard, but we're not breaking any laws by moving our things inside our own house." She gave me a smug smile that made my stomach twist. "We'll see about that," she said, pulling her phone from her pocket. And before I could stop her, she dialed 911, her voice carrying across the quiet lake as she declared, "Yes, I'd like to report suspicious trespassers unloading boxes at the lakefront property. They're refusing to leave. Please send someone immediately." Emma stopped at the doorway, gripping her box a little tighter but staying calm. I could see she wanted to roll her eyes, but instead she just exhaled slowly and shook her head. Meanwhile, Karen, as I later learned everyone called her, was pacing the gravel like a guard dog, clearly thrilled with herself. She ended the call and tucked her phone under her arm, crossing her arms like she had just secured some grand victory. "Sheriff's on the way," she said, her voice dripping with triumph. "And when he gets here, you two will have to explain why you're breaking HOA rules. Good luck with that." At this point I wasn't sure whether to laugh or scream. We had done nothing wrong, and yet here we were, treated like criminals before even unpacking a single box. Emma disappeared inside for a moment and returned with a new box, refusing to let Karen stop her progress. That's the thing about Emma, she doesn't waste her energy on petty drama. She believes in letting the truth speak for itself. But I knew, deep down, that this woman wasn't just going to back down. People like her thrived on control, on making others uncomfortable, and on bending rules to suit themselves. And unfortunately, we had become her latest targets. Karen didn't stop talking either. She circled the moving truck, scribbling notes on her clipboard, muttering things like unauthorized vehicle, possible code violation, and improper unloading. Every word was sharp and meant to intimidate. She leaned down at one point to squint at the license plate, jotting it down with a smug little grin. Every violation will be recorded, she said to no one in particular. And believe me, fines will be enforced. I clenched my jaw, trying not to take the bait. Ma'am, I said as evenly as I could manage, we haven't even had a chance to meet our neighbors yet. Don't you think calling the sheriff over boxes is a little extreme? She whipped her sunglasses down her nose and gave me a look that could freeze water. Rules are rules. And people like you think you can just come in and do whatever you want. Not in this neighborhood. Not on my watch. Emma finally set her box down on the porch and said quietly, "We're not your enemies, you know. We're just moving into our home." Karen sniffed and waved her hand dismissively. "We'll see how long you last here." Her voice was like venom. And with that, she marched back to the end of the driveway, standing there with her arms folded, waiting for the sheriff as if she were a queen about to summon her guards. The peaceful lake air that had drawn us here felt suddenly heavy, and as I looked at Emma, I could tell this was just the beginning of a showdown we never asked for. Karen stood at the end of our driveway like a guard posted at a fortress, pacing back and forth while pretending to study her clipboard. She kept glancing toward the lake road as though she could summon the sheriff faster just by staring in that direction. Every few seconds, she'd mutter something about violations or trespassers, loud enough for us to hear. Emma, still calm, carried another box from the truck to the porch, her face set in quiet determination. I admired her ability to block Karen out, but I could feel my own frustration bubbling. It wasn't just the inconvenience of dealing with someone on a power trip, it was the insult of being treated like criminals when we hadn't done anything wrong. And what worried me even more was the thought of the sheriff actually showing up and thinking we were in the wrong before even hearing our side. In small towns, appearances matter, and we were the outsiders. 15 minutes dragged by, each one filled with Karen's dramatic sighs and her occasional comments about how this neighborhood doesn't allow outsiders. Then finally, the distant hum of an engine broke the stillness. A county sheriff's cruiser rolled down the road, its headlights flashing briefly as it turned into our gravel driveway. Karen straightened instantly, snapping to attention like a soldier about to report for duty. She waved both arms and practically ran to meet the vehicle, her face lit up with satisfaction. "Officer! Officer! Over here," she shouted before the car had even come to a full stop. The sheriff, a tall man with broad shoulders and a calm demeanor, stepped out slowly. His uniform was neat, his belt heavy with gear, and his sunglasses reflected the scene like a mirror. He adjusted his hat and glanced around, taking in the moving truck, the open boxes, Emma carrying another load, and Karen standing there like she had just cracked the biggest crime case in town. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked in a steady voice. Karen jumped in before I could even open my mouth. "The problem, officer, is them." She pointed a dramatic finger toward us as if we were fugitives caught red-handed. "They're trespassing on property that doesn't belong to them. They're unloading boxes without authorization. I suspect illegal materials. Drugs, maybe even weapons. You need to stop them before they cause trouble." She was practically vibrating with glee, convinced she had delivered the knockout punch. The sheriff's expression didn't change. He looked at me, then at Emma, and then back at Karen. "Ma'am," he said evenly, can you tell me exactly what law you believe they're breaking? Karen scoffed, offended by the question. The HOA rules. They're in clear violation of Code 14B, unauthorized move-ins without prior notice, and Code 8C, unsanctioned deliveries. These codes exist for a reason. This community is meant to be orderly, not a dumping ground for whoever decides to show up. She turned toward us, glaring with such intensity you'd think we had robbed her. I demand you search those boxes immediately. Who knows what they're sneaking into our neighborhood? I took a step forward, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. Sheriff, with all due respect, my wife and I bought this cabin fair and square. We closed on it last month. All of this, I gestured toward the truck and the boxes, is our personal property. There's nothing illegal here. Just kitchenware, clothes, and furniture. Emma set her box down on the porch and walked over, wiping her hands on her jeans. She pulled a folded envelope from her pocket and handed it directly to the sheriff. Here's our deed and closing paperwork, officer. Everything's legitimate. The sheriff took the papers, flipped through them briefly, and then raised his eyebrows just slightly. His gaze lingered on Emma longer than expected, as though something had just clicked in his mind. He looked back at Karen, who was still fuming, tapping her foot impatiently. Well, she demanded. Aren't you going to search them? Arrest them? Issue citations at the very least? We can't just let people barge into our neighborhood without consequences. The sheriff closed the envelope and handed it back to Emma with surprising care. Then he did something none of us saw coming. He straightened his posture, raised his hand in a sharp, practiced motion, and gave Emma a crisp salute. Colonel, he said respectfully, I didn't realize this was your residence. Welcome to the county. My jaw nearly dropped. Emma smiled faintly, almost sheepishly, and replied, Retired Colonel, actually. U.S. Army. But yes, this is our home now. The air around us shifted instantly. It was as if the entire power dynamic flipped in a single heartbeat. Karen's smug expression faltered, her mouth hanging open in shock. See, Colonel, she stammered. What do you mean, Colonel? The sheriff turned back to her, his voice firm now, carrying authority that left no room for argument. Ma'am, these are homeowners in good standing. There's no law being broken here. And let me make one thing clear, making false emergency calls wastes county resources. If this happens again, there will be consequences. Karen blinked rapidly, her face paling beneath her makeup. I didn't know. She didn't say she was, the sheriff cut her off with a sharp look. It doesn't matter if you knew or not. What matters is that you called law enforcement under false pretenses. These folks aren't criminals. In fact, they've served this country with distinction. You should be thanking them, not harassing them. I couldn't help it, I looked over at Emma with pride swelling in my chest. She hadn't bragged about her service when we first moved in. She never did. To her, it wasn't about titles or recognition, it was just part of who she was. But seeing Karen crumble under the weight of that revelation was something I'll never forget. Emma didn't gloat, didn't even raise her voice. She simply nodded politely to the sheriff, thanked him for coming, and picked up her box again like nothing had happened. That quiet strength was what made her so remarkable. Karen, meanwhile, looked like a balloon losing air. The confidence drained from her body, her shoulders slumping, her face red with humiliation. For the first time since she stormed into our driveway, she had nothing to say. She opened her mouth a couple of times as though to speak, but no words came out. She finally just muttered something about a misunderstanding and backed away, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. The sheriff gave us one last nod. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call, he said. Then he turned to Karen. And ma'am, I strongly suggest you reconsider how you interact with your neighbors. With that, He climbed back into his cruiser and drove off, leaving the gravel crunching in his wake. Karen stood frozen for a moment, then spun on her heel and hurried down the road, too embarrassed to even look at us. I exhaled slowly, the tension finally leaving my body. Emma gave me a small smile, that kind of smile that says, "See? No need to lose your temper." But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. People like Karen don't give up easily, and although she had been silenced for the moment, I had a feeling we hadn't seen the last of her. The moment the sheriff's salute snapped through the air, everything seemed to freeze. It wasn't just the salute itself, it was the weight behind it, the authority, the instant recognition of respect. Emma didn't even flinch. She stood there calm and steady, her posture natural, almost humble, but you could feel the shift ripple through the air like a wave. The sheriff's words hung there too, addressing her as Colonel, and I swear the birds stopped singing for just a second. Karen, who only moments earlier had been puffed up like a queen commanding her subjects, suddenly looked like a balloon punctured by a pin. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping for air. Her sunglasses slid down the bridge of her nose, revealing wide, darting eyes that couldn't quite make sense of what she was seeing. "Colonel," she croaked, her voice breaking. What do you mean, Colonel?" Emma adjusted the box she was holding, shifting its weight against her hip, and gave the smallest nod. "Retired Colonel, United States Army," she said softly, as though she were just stating the weather. "My husband and I purchased this cabin last month." The sheriff, standing tall and serious, gave her a respectful look. "Ma'am, we're honored to have you in this county. If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to call. My department is at your service." He said it with genuine sincerity, not the empty politeness people sometimes use when they want to move on quickly. This was a man who recognized what Emma had done, what she had sacrificed, and in that moment, he wasn't just speaking as a sheriff but as someone who knew how rare it was to meet a person like her. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to shrink before my eyes. The confidence that had carried her storming into our driveway evaporated. Her shoulders sagged, her grip on her clipboard loosened, and for once she had no accusations to throw, no codes to quote, no insults to fling. It was like someone had hit the mute button on her entire personality. Wait, she stammered, her voice shaking. She's military?" "But she didn't say that when I asked." The sheriff turned to her, his voice sharp enough to cut through her excuses. "She didn't have to, ma'am. It's not relevant to whether or not they have the right to be here. What matters is that you called in a false report, wasting time and resources. These people own this property, and they're breaking no laws. You should be ashamed." Karen looked as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. Her face flushed red, then pale, then red again, and her mouth opened with another attempt at a rebuttal. But no words came. She swallowed hard, gripping her clipboard like it might protect her from the weight of her own humiliation. Emma didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. She simply nodded again at the sheriff, gave him a polite thank you, and walked up the porch steps, setting her box down as though nothing unusual had happened. That was Emma's way, never gloating, never rubbing victory in someone's face. Her quiet strength was more powerful than any raised voice could have been. I stood there, half amazed and half proud, watching Karen's entire empire of self-importance crumble in a matter of seconds. The sheriff wasn't done, though. He looked Karen directly in the eye, his voice calm but unyielding. "I'll say this one last time, do not make false calls again. If you have an issue with your neighbors, you handle it respectfully, not like this. Am I clear?" Karen nodded quickly, too quickly, like a child caught misbehaving. "Why yes, Sheriff. Of course. Just a misunderstanding." The sheriff gave me a small nod before heading back to his cruiser. He didn't turn his lights on this time, didn't make a show of leaving. He just drove off down the gravel road, dust rising in his wake. The silence that followed was almost comical. Karen remained frozen, her clipboard dangling from her hand, her eyes darting between Emma, me, and the road where the sheriff had disappeared. She opened her mouth again, as if to say something, but when she saw Emma calmly carrying another box from the truck, she seemed to think better of it. Her face contorted with something that looked like a mix of anger and embarrassment, and then she spun on her heel, marching down the road without another word. Emma watched her go for a moment, then turned to me with the faintest smirk. "Well," she said, "that's one way to meet the neighbors." I laughed, the tension finally breaking inside me. Not exactly the welcome wagon I expected. Emma shrugged and grabbed another box. "I told you I didn't want drama. Guess we didn't have much choice." We spent the next hour unloading boxes in relative peace. Every so often, I caught myself glancing down the road, half expecting Karen to reappear with another ridiculous complaint. But she didn't. Not that day. And as I carried in our belongings, I couldn't stop replaying the look on her face when the sheriff saluted Emma. That moment was burned into my memory, the exact second her smugness shattered and reality hit her like a brick. It wasn't just that Karen had lost her little battle. It was that she'd been forced to confront the fact that the world didn't revolve around her clipboard, her rules, or her so-called authority. There were bigger things in life, real service, real sacrifice, real respect, and she had no power over that. Later, as we set the last boxes down inside the cabin, I asked Emma how she had stayed so calm. She just smiled, that quiet, knowing smile of hers. "I've dealt with louder voices in worse places," she said simply. "A clipboard doesn't scare me." And that was that. For Emma, the whole ordeal was already behind her. For me, it was still sinking in, and I couldn't help but think this was only the beginning. Because if there was one thing I knew about people like Karen, it was that they never gave up completely. In the days that followed, the story of what happened in our driveway spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. Small towns have a way of passing information around, and apparently watching Karen get put in her place by the sheriff had been the highlight of the week for more than a few of our new neighbors. At first, I wasn't sure how people would react to us. We were newcomers, and usually, when the HOA president paints a target on someone, everyone else either avoids them or joins the pile-on to stay out of trouble themselves. But something different happened. Instead of giving us the cold shoulder, neighbors started showing up at our cabin. One couple brought over a pie and introduced themselves with sheepish smiles. Another man stopped by offering to help unload the last of our furniture. Even people walking their dogs paused on the road to wave and say, "Welcome to the neighborhood." It was like Karen's defeat had opened a floodgate. Emma accepted it all graciously, thanking everyone but never making a big deal of the sheriff's salute or her military service. She never bragged, never reminded anyone of what had happened. If people mentioned the incident, she simply smiled and changed the subject, preferring to focus on settling into our new home. I noticed, though, that the respect in their eyes was real. They weren't just being polite. They looked at Emma differently now, as if they recognized something they hadn't seen before. Meanwhile, Karen disappeared. Not literally, but for days after the sheriff incident, she was nowhere to be seen. No marching down the gravel road with her clipboard, no barking orders at neighbors mowing their lawns, no passive-aggressive notes stuck to mailboxes. It was as if she had retreated into her house to lick her wounds. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But then I remembered the way she had stood in our driveway accusing Emma of smuggling drugs in boxes marked "kitchen" and "family photos," and the sympathy vanished. Still, a part of me knew she wasn't done. People like Karen don't just disappear. They plot, they stew, and they wait for the next opportunity. And sure enough, she reappeared about a week later. Emma and I were sitting on the porch one evening, enjoying the sunset over the lake. The water shimmered orange and gold, the air smelled of pine and damp earth, and for once, it felt like the peaceful retreat we had imagined when we bought the cabin. That's when I heard the sound of heels clicking against the gravel. Karen appeared at the end of our driveway, clipboard once again clutched to her chest like armor. She walked slower this time, her usual swagger gone, but her eyes still held that sharp glint of control. She stopped a few feet away from the porch and cleared her throat. "I came to apologize," she said stiffly, as though the word itself tasted bitter on her tongue. Emma didn't move from her chair. She just looked at Karen calmly, waiting. I could tell she wanted Karen to say it properly, not in half measures. Karen shifted uncomfortably. "I may have overreacted. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. I didn't realize who you were." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Who I am doesn't change the fact that you were out of line," she said gently but firmly. "You don't need to know someone's title to treat them with basic respect." Karen's face flushed again. She glanced down at her clipboard, then back up. "I suppose you're right," she muttered. For a long, awkward moment, she just stood there, fidgeting. Finally, she blurted out, "People talk, you know. They say I'm too strict, that I make too many rules. But without rules, this place would fall apart." Emma leaned forward slightly. "There's a difference between order and control. Order makes people feel safe. Control makes them feel trapped. You might want to think about which one you're really after." It wasn't said cruelly, just honestly, and that was what made it sting the most. Karen opened her mouth, then shut it again, clearly having no response. For the first time, she looked small, vulnerable even, standing there with her armor of authority cracked wide open. She gave a curt nod, turned, and walked away without another word. As she disappeared down the road, I exhaled slowly. "Do you think she'll change?" I asked Emma. She shook her head with a small smile. "People like her rarely change. But at least now, she knows she can't intimidate everyone." And she was right. From that day forward, Karen never stormed into our driveway again. She still existed, still clutched her clipboard, still whispered her opinions about who was mowing their lawn too late or whose boat trailer wasn't parked straight enough. But she kept her distance from us. Maybe it was the sheriff's warning. Maybe it was the memory of that salute. Or maybe it was the quiet strength in Emma's words that had left a mark deeper than Karen wanted to admit. Whatever the reason, life at the lake finally began to settle into the peace we had been searching for. We spent mornings drinking coffee on the porch, evenings kayaking across the still water, and weekends grilling with new friends who had once been too scared to defy Karen. And every so often, when the story came up at a neighborhood gathering, people would laugh about the day Karen called the sheriff on a retired army colonel carrying boxes into her own cabin. It became a kind of local legend, a reminder that arrogance can crumble in the face of real respect. As for me, I'll never forget the look on Karen's face the moment she realized who Emma was. All the anger, all the superiority, all the certainty drained out of her in an instant, leaving nothing but silence. It was the silence of someone who had just realized their power was nothing more than smoke. Emma never flaunted her service. She never needed to. But I saw the pride in the sheriff's eyes, in the neighbors who came by later, and even in the quiet nods people gave her when she walked down the road. Respect, real respect, isn't something you demand with fines or rules or threats. It's something you earn by who you are and what you've done. And if Karen ever forgets that lesson, if she ever thinks about challenging Emma again, well, let's just say she'll remember quickly that sometimes the woman carrying the boxes has more strength than anyone realizes.